A struggling farmer quietly donates what little he has to a hospital. No one knows it was him. But just days later, a private jet descends onto his field, and everything changes. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Rain-soaked rooftops shimmered beneath the first light of dawn as Henry Dawson, a modest farmer on the outskirts of Clarksfield County, unlatched his barn. He had little in the world: a few acres of weary soil, a battered tractor, and a heart big enough to ache for everyone. Lately, that heart was focused on the small hospital down the road, on the verge of shutting its doors for lack of funds. Henry couldn't bear that thought. The building meant everything to families living miles from any city. Henry recalled how, years ago, gentle nurses tended his wife when she was ill. Though she passed, he never forgot their compassion. Now the hospital was gasping for help. Henry took a deep breath and did the unthinkable. He then gathered every cent of his meager savings, slipped the bills into a plain envelope, and placed it at reception, refusing to give his name. Dr. Marianne Brooks, the hospital's exhausted director, was stunned. The unmarked envelope contained just enough to cover overdue utility bills, but more than that, it ignited a spark of hope among the discouraged staff. Who had given so selflessly? Nurses whispered theories in the corridors, weaving tales of secret benefactors. Dr. Brooks vowed to find this mystery donor. Little did she know, the truth was simpler and closer than she imagined. All of Clarksfield buzzed with speculation. 1 week later, Henry rose at dawn to feed his chickens and discovered the impossible: a sleek jet parked in his overgrown field. Stunned, he dropped his bucket, scattering seed at his feet. Nobody in Clarksfield owned such an aircraft, let alone soared it into farmland. Heart pounding, Henry approached the gleaming fuselage. Two well-dressed strangers emerged, their polished shoes caked with mud. He swallowed hard. They asked for Henry by name, leaving him speechless. The taller man introduced himself as Malcolm Young, an emissary from a philanthropic foundation. Beside him stood Anna Pierce, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a smile. They claimed they had urgent business with Henry Dawson. Confused and wary, Henry led them to his humble porch. Chickens scattered as the strangers carefully took seats on overturned crates. Malcolm cleared his throat, explaining they'd traced an anonymous donation back to this worn-out farm. Henry's cheeks reddened. "I'm afraid you've got the wrong man," Henry muttered, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Anna opened her briefcase and produced a single photograph from the hospital's security camera. It showed Henry slipping an envelope onto the reception counter. With gentle insistence, Malcolm praised Henry's sacrifice. He explained that their organization offered grants to rural communities displaying extraordinary generosity. The donation might have been small by corporate standards, but its impact spoke volumes. Henry's head spun. He'd never sought recognition, merely trying to ensure the hospital remained open. Yet here were two strangers praising his deed and promising help he never dreamed possible. Malcolm described potential renovations for the hospital, scholarships for local youth, even relief for Henry's mounting debts. Doubt flickered in Henry's eyes. Nothing in life came free, but as he gazed at Anna's earnest expression, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was truly real. Emily, Henry's daughter, peered from the doorway. Barefoot and curious, she inched closer, eyes wide at the talk of jets and grants. Anna beckoned her forward, reassuring her with a smile. They explained that any initiative would benefit the whole community. New equipment for clinics, upgraded school facilities, farmland assistance. Emily glanced at her father, hope mingling with caution. Even at her young age, she sensed life might be offering them a rare second chance. Anna handed Henry a card, bearing only a phone number and a simple emblem of intertwined hands. "We'll stay in town for a few days," she said. "Talk it over. If you agree, we'll handle logistics." If not, we'll respect your decision." Henry studied the emblem, recalling the hospital's halls and the faces of neighbors who depended on it. Part of him wanted to cling to pride, but another part whispered that help had arrived. After they left, Henry sat alone on the porch, the midday sun washing over his so many fields. Emily joined him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Pa, isn't this what you wanted, for the hospital to stay open?" He nodded, voice thick. "True, but sometimes help comes with a price." She met his gaze, unwavering. "And sometimes it's a blessing, if we let it be." Henry exhaled, mulling over a future he never imagined. That evening he found no rest. Sleep eluded him, replaced by visions of doctors forced to turn patients away. He pictured closed doors, neighbors traveling hours for care. Why reject a chance to save them? At dawn, Henry dialed the number on Anna's card. His voice quivered, but he managed a greeting. Within an hour, the jet reappeared, dust swirling as it gently touched down. Malcolm and Anna emerged, their smiles brimming with quiet reassurance. Over steaming coffee in Henry's kitchen, they mapped out possibilities. The foundation would fund the hospital's expansions and supply updated equipment. Staff retention grants might lure new nurses to the region to flourish. In return, they asked only that Henry continue advocating for community needs, bridging residents and resources. He hesitated, uncertain about overseeing anything. Yet Emily's hopeful gaze spurred him on. If all he had to offer was sincerity, perhaps that was truly enough. Within days, news swept Clarksfield. The hospital would receive a lifeline. Contractors arrived, scoping corners for upgrades. Dr. Brooks, overjoyed, embraced Henry in the corridor. "We owe you more than we can repay," she whispered. But Henry insisted he was just a messenger. The real credit, he said, belonged to all who fought to keep the facility alive. As rumors about the mysterious jet spread, townsfolk started to wonder, had Henry's deed unlocked a miracle? Even the local paper ran a front-page story. Farmers' altruism spurs generous intervention. Henry winced at the attention, but Emily beamed with pride. Meanwhile, Malcolm and Anna quietly set meetings with the mayor and local bankers. Debts on Henry's farm were renegotiated, threatened foreclosures were halted. New seeds arrived, along with the promise of modern irrigation equipment. Hope blossomed anew. With each development, Henry marveled that a single envelope had truly sparked so much transformation. One afternoon, as Henry tested the new irrigation pumps, he spotted Malcolm by the barn, gazing at a battered photo nailed to the wall. It showed Henry's late wife cradling baby Emily. Malcolm's voice was truly soft. "Your loss drove you to save others, didn't it?" Henry swallowed hard, remembering nights when despair nearly consumed him. "She always believed in giving, no matter how little we had." Malcolm nodded, understanding the depth of Henry's resolve. As the weeks passed, progress at the hospital was impossible to ignore. Fresh paint brightened hallways, staff morale soared, and advanced equipment arrived in labeled crates. People came from neighboring counties curious about Clarksfield's sudden turn of fortune. Henry remained humble, declining interviews. He was content to see patients receiving proper care. Even local skeptics admitted that, for once, good news truly overshadowed the usual hardships. And at the heart stood one farmer's quiet generosity. Late one afternoon, as the sun sank behind rolling hills, Henry found himself staring at the field where the jet first landed. He remembered how everything changed that day. His donation sparked a wave of kindness, proving that one small act could ripple across an entire community. Emily stepped beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Pa," she whispered, "Mom would be proud." Henry nodded, tears in his eyes. Indeed, gratitude and hope now flourished. Henry woke early the next day, stirred by the rhythmic hush of new sprinkler lines feeding his crops. With the hospital renovations underway, he found it easier to breathe. For months, he'd woken overwhelmed by looming bank letters and medical closures that felt impossible to avert. Now, stepping outside, he caught sight of fresh green seedlings swelling with promise. The old sorrow in his heart hadn't disappeared, but it no longer smothered him. He recalled telling Emily not so long ago that folks in Clarksfield could scarcely cling to optimism. These days, she teased him gently for grinning at the sunrise, like someone who'd discovered gold in a potato patch. Before breakfast, Henry walked to the newly cleared corner of his land. A pair of technicians from the foundation had installed advanced irrigation pipes that used less water and yielded better growth. Henry admired their handiwork, trying to keep from feeling out of place. Overseeing modern technology, after all, was no small feat for a man who'd relied on second-hand hoses most of his life. But he was determined to learn. His pride, he decided, would never stand in the way of progress that might help neighbors. As he made his way back toward the barn, he found Malcolm waiting by the fence. The man's polished shoes sank in the dirt, yet he didn't complain. Instead, he ran a hand over the weathered posts, appearing almost moved by how simple everything was. "Morning," Henry said, tipping his cap. Malcolm greeted him with a polite nod. "We're finalizing some hospital expansion details," he explained, "and wanted your input on new training programs for local staff. Anna's idea, actually. She believes that teaching more nurse practitioners could keep things running even when doctors rotate out." Henry felt a flicker of hesitation. "I'm no expert, but if you think more training helps, I'd never argue. Just be sure nobody feels forced to leave the community in pursuit of degrees. We'd hate to lose them." Malcolm smiled. "That's precisely why we plan to bring instructors here. No reason to uproot those who want to stay." Emily joined them, hair blowing in the breeze, a small notebook clutched in her hand. She'd been scribbling thoughts for volunteer projects to support the hospital. "Pa, guess what?" she said eagerly. "Some of the high school seniors want to start a fundraiser for new children's equipment. Maybe a playground near the hospital grounds to help kids who need therapy." Henry glanced at Malcolm. "See, everyone's jumping in. I never imagined such a response." Malcolm's voice held quiet warmth. Generosity begets generosity. They strolled together past neat rows of sprouting vegetables. Distantly, the main road led to the hospital, where trucks rumbled with new materials. Henry spotted Dr. Brooks in a borrowed pickup, hauling in fresh produce from local farms. She'd convinced a half-dozen families to donate surplus cucumbers and tomatoes for patients' meals. That might have seemed small to outsiders, but Henry understood. In tight-knit places, every ounce of kindness fed a cycle of goodwill. The day grew bright as Henry and Emily set off to see how the hospital renovations fared. Malcolm had business calls, so he lingered at the farm. Henry's old truck chugged along the dusty road, passing neighbors who waved from fields. He slowed near a tidy house with a crooked mailbox. Mrs. Turner, stooped with age, was watering potted flowers. She grinned at Henry, her eyes alight with relief. In truth, she was the first neighbor who told him about the hospital's dire straits all those months ago. Now that closure no longer threatened, she placed fresh daisies by her gate each morning, an unspoken thank you. Henry gave her a gentle wave, his chest tight with gratitude. When they arrived, the hospital's exterior looked worlds away from the chipped paint and sagging roof it once displayed. Crews replaced dingy siding with sturdy panels. Windows sparkled, framing glimpses of bustling corridors. Inside, they found Dr. Brooks demonstrating a new digital patient record system to the staff. She ushered them toward the east wing, newly painted in soft pastel shades that brightened the once gloomy space. "We'll have a dedicated children's ward here," she said, eyes shining. "One day we might even bring specialized pediatric care to Clarksfield instead of sending families to the city." Emily drifted off to chat with a nurse about volunteer schedules, leaving Henry to follow Dr. Brooks deeper into the construction zone. Sparks flew from welding torches where partitions were reinforced. He'd never seen the building so full of purpose. The directors of the philanthropic foundation had made good on every promise, yet Henry wondered how they afforded everything. Dr. Brooks seemed to read his mind. "Malcolm says they have donors worldwide," she offered. "We shouldn't question a blessing, but I admire how you keep them honest." Henry scratched the back of his neck. "I just don't want Clarksfield left with bills we can't pay. Nobody wants to owe someone a debt bigger than the farmland itself." Dr. Brooks rested a hand on his shoulder. "Your caution is wise, but from what I've seen, this isn't about indebting us. They really just want to help." A gentle hush descended as they neared the newly designated quiet zone, designed for recovery. Henry peeked into a room near completion. Bright curtains, a modern bed, and wide windows that brought in sunlight. Memories surfaced of the final days with his wife, how they'd both felt cramped in a tiny ward. He exhaled, touched by the thought of other families having more peace in their hardest hours. By mid-afternoon, Emily found him, her face flushed with enthusiasm. "Pa, guess what?" She described how local high schoolers pledged time to paint murals in the new wing. "And we can display farmland scenes or encouraging quotes. I'm volunteering too." Henry's heart swelled. Months ago, gloom shadowed Clarksfield's teenagers, who expected to leave town after graduation. Now they poured creativity into their own region. "Your mother would be so proud," he said, his voice catching. They drove home under a wide sky tinted with pink. Henry reflected on this new chapter, an unthinkable shift from his day-to-day struggle. If only more quiet hearts found the means to give, he mused. He'd always believed the world might change if ordinary folks simply helped, without expecting reward. He hadn't anticipated how far-reaching that single act would become. The next day brought a wave of excitement as townspeople prepared for an upcoming press event. The Philanthropic Foundation insisted the local hospital's revival merited broader attention. Henry shied from cameras, but Malcolm reasoned that publicity could prompt further donations. "Let the world see what this place has accomplished," he urged. "We'll highlight the hospital, not you specifically, but your presence might inspire others." That last thought carried weight. Henry didn't fancy the spotlight, but if his presence could bolster future acts of compassion, maybe the discomfort was worth it. On the morning of the event, the newly paved hospital parking lot filled with cars and a few news vans. Emily, wearing her best blouse, hurried about with the younger volunteers, arranging chairs by a temporary stage. Flowers lined the walkway, donated by a local greenhouse that believed in the project. A mild breeze rustled banners that read, "Clarksfield County Hospital, a new dawn." Henry hovered at the edge of the crowd, uncertain. Dr. Brooks took the microphone, voice trembling with excitement. She thanked all who'd pitched in and singled out groups, the local farmers, the retired teachers who'd helped with administrative tasks, the foundation that funded new expansions. Henry tried to slip away, but an eager reporter spotted him, stepping near with a notepad. "Is it true you were the one who sparked this initiative? Any comments?" Henry's tongue felt thick. He managed a faint smile. "I just did what anyone should do. Saw a problem, tried to help. The real heroes are the hospital staff and all these neighbors." Malcolm gave a short speech, praising the community's resilience. "It's easy to write checks," he said, "but it's the generosity of spirit, the willingness to unite, that makes real change." Applause rippled. Henry noticed Anna in the front row, nodding. She'd quietly ensured all the financial details were sorted behind the scenes. Whenever Henry thanked her, she'd grin and say, "Can't help if folks don't help themselves first. You showed everyone how." After the speeches, cameras clicked while donors and staff toured the refurbished wards. Henry did his best to dodge interviews. At one point, Dr. Brooks beckoned him into a small office. Emily joined them, eyes curious. Inside waited a man in a crisp business suit, Walter Pierce. Anna's older brother and the lead trustee of the foundation. Rising, he shook Henry's hand. "I've been longing to meet you. My sister speaks highly of your humility." Henry stammered some greeting, uncertain why he'd been summoned. Walter got straight to it. "We're launching a national campaign to replicate this model, empowering local care with philanthropic support. We need a community ambassador who's lived it. We'd pay a stipend if you'd speak at future gatherings, sharing Clarksfield's story." Henry's throat went dry. Him? Traveling and giving talks? It sounded absurd. Emily's face lit up at the idea, but Henry fiddled with his worn cap. "Sir, I'm just a farmer," he mumbled. Walter's expression softened. "Exactly. People trust real experiences, not corporate jargon. Think on it. Let us know if you're interested. No pressure." Anna then appeared, adding softly, "Your voice matters. Even if you choose not to do it, we respect that. But you've seen firsthand how generosity transforms lives." Henry managed a nod, promising to consider it. Emily left the office brimming with excitement. "Pa, imagine traveling around, telling folks about how we saved the hospital, all those towns that could do the same." But Henry, worn from the day's events, shook his head. "I'm not sure I belong on any stage." That evening, father and daughter returned to the farm. The setting sun stretched warm colors over the fields. Emily hopped out of the truck and ran to check on the new irrigation lines. Henry trailed behind, scanning rows of healthy, well-watered seedlings. He recalled the sleepless nights when he wondered if the soil would yield enough to keep them afloat. Now it seemed the land had revived just as the hospital had. Emily crouched by a row of young corn. "It's remarkable, Pa. Our farms never looked better." Henry knelt beside her, pressing a palm against the moist earth. "And to think we almost lost it all," he murmured. Side by side, they watched the sky fade from pink to purple. A hush fell as dusk settled. The notion of stepping beyond Clarksfield to share his story still felt foreign, but the changes around him whispered that growth might come in many forms. He remembered what Dr. Brooks said about gratitude, how it was like a seed that, once planted, spread roots in every direction. Perhaps he'd begun that process unknowingly with his plain white envelope. So much had blossomed from that single act of quiet mercy. Now the foundation asked him to help scatter more seeds of compassion in distant fields. Could he find the courage? His mind drifted to the day he held that envelope outside the hospital door, trembling as he placed his entire savings on the counter. It felt terrifying then, but also right. If he dared that, maybe he could speak a few words to others. He wouldn't do it for recognition, but to encourage them to follow their own hearts. Henry closed his eyes, letting the warm breeze fill his lungs. Yes, there was fear in stepping up, but there was far greater beauty in sharing hope. He stood slowly, dusting off his knees. Nearby, Emily rose too, taking his arm. "You okay, Pa?" He offered a small nod. "I think I am," he said. Together they walked back to the truck, each lost in thoughts of what lay ahead. As stars blinked into existence above, Henry resolved that if the foundation truly needed him to stand in front of others, he might do it. After all, pride and fear had never stopped him from sowing seeds in parched ground before. When they finally turned in for the night, a single lamp glowed beside Henry's worn armchair. His mind spun with new possibilities. He pictured farmland in distant counties, hospitals on the brink of closing, families praying for a miracle. He hadn't changed the world, but perhaps he could help others see they too had the power to do so, one small act at a time. And with that final thought, Henry Dawson laid his head down, drifting into dreams of fields brimming with harvest and hospital halls echoing with laughter. Henry rose the following morning, more resolved than he'd felt in years. Sunlight streamed through the slats in his old window, illuminating a new day of possibility. After breakfast, He slipped on his well-worn boots and steered his dusty pickup toward town. Emily had classes that morning, so he traveled alone, allowing silence to guide his thoughts. Every so often he glanced at the passenger seat, recalling the times she'd chirped encouragement as they drove these roads together. He inhaled deeply, reminding himself that now he carried the community's hopes, not just his own. At the hospital, Henry parked in the far lot, letting construction crews claim closer spots. Hammering and power tools clamored overhead as he made his way into the renovated lobby. Gone were the scuffed floors, replaced by gleaming tiles that echoed with promise. He spotted Anna seated near the new reception desk, typing briskly on a tablet. Though she kept a polished demeanor, Henry sensed genuine warmth beneath her professional exterior. She looked up with a smile. "Henry, good morning. I was hoping we could chat." Adjusting his cap, he approached. "That's why I came," he admitted. "I've been turning your brother's offer over in my mind." Anna's eyes lit. "Wonderful. Let's find a quiet corner." They settled in a half-finished staff lounge, walls partially painted a bright teal. The faint smell of fresh plaster lingered. Anna folded her hands on the table. "I know the idea of traveling to speak can be overwhelming, but we believe your authentic story can move people. You don't need fancy talk, just honesty." Henry nodded, recalling the nightmares he'd had about public gaffes. "If it helps others see how one action can ripple across entire towns, I figure it's worth a shot. But I won't pretend it's easy for me." Anna's face softened. "We appreciate your courage. Let's start small. There's a conference in a nearby city, 2 hours away, where donors gather. You'd give a short talk about Clarksfield's revival? Only if you're comfortable." Henry pressed his lips together, picturing a room full of well-heeled philanthropists and media. "I'll do it," he murmured finally, "as long as it's just telling folks the truth." Anna exhaled with relief. "I'll make arrangements then. We'll keep it simple." Leaving the lounge, Henry nearly collided with Dr. Brooks, her arms full of supplies. She beamed when she heard he'd accepted. "You'll do fine," she said. "Tell them about the farmers who chipped in produce, the teachers who volunteered, the kids who painted murals. Show them real community spirit." Her words spurred Henry on, making him suspect he might actually represent something bigger than himself. Already, his heart thumped with a mixture of dread and pride. He drove home in time to see Emily bounding toward him from the school bus. He gently told her about the upcoming speaking engagement. She squealed with delight, clapping her hands as though he'd announced a secret holiday. "That's incredible, Pa. You'll be brilliant. Just be yourself." He patted her shoulder. "I'm glad you think so. It doesn't feel so brilliant in my head." She laughed softly. "Well, maybe I can help you practice. We can run lines in the barn if you like." That evening, they gathered in the barn's warm lantern glow, perched on hay bales. Emily coached Henry on speaking clearly, making eye contact, and pausing between ideas. He tried reciting a small paragraph about how the hospital nearly closed, how donors arrived, how neighbors came together. At first, he felt stiff, stumbling over phrases. Emily kept encouraging him. After several tries, Henry closed his eyes, recalling the day he'd slipped that envelope to the receptionist. He spoke from his heart instead of from notes. "When the hospital was on the edge," he said, his voice echoing in the rustic space, "I thought about all those times staff cared for my wife. I remembered families with nowhere else to go. I couldn't stand by. I gave what I could, never dreaming it'd turn into all this." He paused, swallowing a lump in his throat. "But it did. And I guess that means small kindness can be bigger than we know." Emily blinked back tears, then applauded. "That's it, Pa. That's what people need to hear." A few nights later, Henry climbed into the Foundation's sleek sedan for the short trip. Malcolm drove, with Anna navigating. Emily had soccer practice, so Henry left her in the care of kindly Mrs. Turner. Rain pelted the windshield as they sped across winding roads, farmland gradually giving way to suburban sprawl. Henry fidgeted with his shirt collar. He'd never worn a pressed button-down for anything but weddings and funerals, yet tonight demanded a bit more polish. They arrived at a stately conference hall, its exterior glowing with strings of lights. Valets hustled under umbrellas. Henry stepped out, nearly losing his footing on the slick pavement. Malcolm steadied him with a quick arm. Inside, the lobby buzzed with dignitaries in tailored suits, murmuring around tables of gleaming brochures. A wave of self-consciousness almost turned Henry around, but Anna gently guided him toward an auditorium door. "Trust me," she whispered. "They're just people." They found seats near the front, while event organizers introduced a series of philanthropic success stories. Henry listened to tales of large-scale donations and corporate expansions, feeling small by comparison. He glanced at the stage's bright lights and swallowed. Eventually, an organizer stepped up. "Tonight we'll hear from Henry Dawson, a farmer whose single act of quiet generosity became the catalyst for an entire region's renewal." Henry's legs shook as he climbed onto the stage, guided by polite applause. The spotlight felt hot. Clearing his throat, he gripped the wooden lectern. Then he remembered Emily's words. "Just speak the truth." His voice quavered at first. He described Clarksfield County, how neighbors had little money but helped anyway. He recounted how the hospital was about to fold, how he'd feared losing the only place families could turn in emergencies. Then his fateful decision to give all he had. "I never intended to be found out," he said, scanning a sea of rapt faces. "I thought I was just doing what was right, but that small act caught the attention of generous people like the ones here tonight. They showed up in a fancy jet." Chuckles rippled through the crowd. Emboldened, Henry forged on. It felt like a dream, but it was real. And once they offered assistance, our little town discovered how to help each other more. People gave time, produce, care. We realized we weren't helpless. We were part of something bigger. He paused, letting the hush settle. "I'm grateful we saved the hospital, but I think the real miracle was seeing how one spark lit so many flames. That's the power in everyday folks who decide to act." Applause erupted, mingling with whistles. Henry blinked, tears threatening, then offered a tremulous smile and stepped away from the lectern. His heart thundered, but he felt alive. In the wings, Malcolm and Anna pulled him into a warm embrace. "You did it!" Anna exclaimed, voice trembling. Malcolm's grin stretched wide. "They loved you, Henry." The next speaker took the stage, but Henry, breath unsteady, sank into a chair backstage. He listened vaguely to the next presentation, flush with relief that he hadn't stumbled. Anna quietly slipped away to greet a line of people forming, each hoping to meet him. After the session ended, Henry found himself shaking hands with wide-eyed donors. Some asked how they might replicate Clarksfield's model. Others simply praised his sincerity. He got introduced to a philanthropic group from several states over, who offered to visit his farm. Bewildered, he nodded politely, not sure how many more changes he could handle. Malcolm skillfully navigated the crowd, ensuring Henry didn't feel overwhelmed. As they finally drove away from the conference hall, Henry slumped in the back seat. "That was a lot," he admitted. Anna patted his shoulder from the front. "And you managed it beautifully," Malcolm concurred. "We can't measure how many hearts you touched. There's already talk of new proposals for rural aid programs." Henry gazed out the window, watching blurred city lights pass. "I hope it helps," he murmured. "I truly do." Exhaustion set in, so Henry dozed, lulled by the hum of the car's engine and the gentle conversation up front. When he awoke, they neared Clarksfield. The county sign loomed in the headlights. "Welcome to Clarksfield, where neighbors become family." He smiled faintly at that slogan. Perhaps it was more accurate now than ever. Soon the sedan pulled into his farmhouse yard, the porch light casting a warm glow across the gravel. Emily bolted outside, still wearing her soccer jersey, arms flung wide as Henry emerged. "How'd it go?" she cried. He chuckled, giving her a quick hug. "It was nerve-wracking, but I managed. They clapped and everything." She beamed. "I knew you'd be great." Anna and Malcolm said goodnight, leaving father and daughter alone under a brilliant starry sky. A soft breeze carried the scent of newly turned earth. Henry led Emily indoors, recounting the questions donors asked, how they might want to visit. She listened intently, proud as can be. They turned in late, each carrying a sense of triumph. That small trip changed Henry's perception of the world beyond Clarksfield. The next morning, he rose with an odd mixture of normal routine, feeding chickens, checking irrigation, and the afterglow of speaking in front of hundreds. Word of his talk reached the local paper, which phoned him for a follow-up story. Henry politely declined more interviews for now, preferring to focus on the farm. He insisted with a shy laugh that stardom wasn't for him. While Henry busied himself repairing a fence, his phone buzzed. Emily answered, then waved him over. "Pa, it's Dr. Brooks. Urgent. They want you at the hospital." Alarm flickered in him. He hurriedly took the call. Dr. Brooks's voice bristled with excitement rather than panic. "I'm sorry to sound frantic, Henry, but we just got an unexpected delivery. You need to see this for yourself." Concerned yet curious, he hopped into his truck. At the hospital, staff congregated around the driveway, gawking at a convoy of vehicles bearing the logo of a medical supply company. Dr. Brooks approached, face shining. "They've sent advanced diagnostic machines, Henry. Stuff we never dreamed we'd get for years." Henry's jaw dropped as boxes stamped with top-shelf brand names were unloaded. A representative stepped forward, explaining that his company heard Henry's speech at the conference. Moved by the story, they decided to expedite shipments that ordinarily cost fortunes. Seeing the brand-new monitors, scanning devices, and other specialized tools, Henry felt his pulse quicken. It was too much to take in. Nurses offered tearful thanks, knowing such modern equipment would save countless hours of travel to bigger facilities. The supply rep extended a handshake. "Your message resonated with our CEO. He insisted Clarksfield get priority." Henry nodded, overwhelmed. "This is beyond anything we imagined." As crates disappeared inside, Dr. Brooks spun around. "With this technology, we can perform in-house tests that once took weeks of scheduling in the city. It's revolutionary." Henry glanced around at grinning staff. Even the most stoic among them seemed near tears. He realized how drastically life had changed. Not long ago, they were counting pennies to keep the lights on. Now the hospital brimmed with state-of-the-art capabilities. For an ordinary man, it bordered on surreal. He walked through the halls, passing newly stocked rooms. He overheard a young technician exclaim how a certain piece of software would let them detect heart conditions early. Another nurse mentioned that rural families would no longer fear hour-long ambulance rides. Henry felt both proud and humbled. Exiting into fresh air, he breathed deeply. Perhaps his testimony truly did ripple outward, stirring more hearts than he thought possible. As Henry climbed into his truck, heading back to the farm, he reflected on the unstoppable momentum building in Clarksfield. Generosity, once sparked, cascaded across every barrier. He'd never sought personal admiration. He just wanted families to have the care his wife once received. Now that wish seemed to be coming true on a grander scale, powered by the kindness of strangers. Steering onto the dusty road, Henry felt a swelling sense of purpose. If telling his story could catalyze so many blessings, he resolved to keep sharing it. The next time someone requested his presence, he wouldn't hesitate. Dreams flourished here and everywhere else, yearning for a bit of hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was what he was meant to do. Plant seeds of compassion far beyond his humble fields. In the days that followed the arrival of the new equipment, Clarksfield County Hospital began brimming with possibility. Nurses and doctors attended quick training sessions to master the advanced diagnostics. Henry watched from the sidelines, unable to stop smiling whenever he noticed how swiftly everything had changed. He wasn't naive. There would still be challenges, but for once, the hospital had the tools to face them. Patients who used to wait weeks for specialized care were now getting quick answers, all thanks to a cascade of kindness that started with his small gift. One crisp afternoon, Henry swung by to see if Dr. Brooks needed help. He found her in an unused office, flipping through catalogs for an upcoming expansion of the children's ward. She looked up as he tapped the doorframe. "Henry," she said. "Just the man I wanted to see. I've been meaning to ask if you'd join a planning committee. We're adding a pediatric therapy garden outside the hospital, and you've got the best farming know-how." Henry scratched his ear. "I'd be glad to. But you sure you want my half-baked ideas?" Dr. Brooks gave a wry grin. "Your so-called half-baked ideas saved us from closure. I trust you." Henry nodded, a surge of warmth filling his chest. He couldn't recall the last time anyone outside his family placed so much faith in him. He agreed to attend the next meeting, set for the following week. Dr. Brooks explained that a prominent child development specialist, recommended by the foundation, was traveling in to advise. They wanted Henry to propose ways local agriculture might blend with therapeutic design. That night, Henry retrieved an old notebook he once used for budget calculations. He flipped past scribbled figures, random musings, finally settling on a blank page. Sketching in pencil, he imagined raised garden beds where children could plant seeds, watch them sprout, maybe even harvest small vegetables to learn about healthy eating. He jotted notes about possible plants, soft herbs like mint or thyme that carried soothing scents. He pictured colorful flowers to attract butterflies, a path wide enough for wheelchairs. Despite the novelty, the ideas came naturally, and soon he was lost in creative reverie. The next morning, as the sky tinted pink, Henry drove into town for supplies. Surrounded by fresh produce at the market, he realized how far the region had come. The local stand owners chatted about the hospital's new wards, proud that produce from these stalls might one day feed recovering patients. Everyone felt a sense of ownership in the facility's success. Henry loaded a crate of strawberries, planning to donate them so staff could offer a sweet snack for visiting families. Old Miss Tinsley, the vendor, refused payment. "A token of thanks," she insisted. He brought the berries to the hospital cafeteria, where the cooks lit up at the sight of fresh fruit. Then Henry wandered the corridors, greeting nurses and scanning the changes that had already become routine. He passed by a father comforting a small boy with a bandaged foot, saw them both smiling at a mural of farmland Emily and her friends had painted. A hush of gratitude filled him. As he ambled toward the exit, a woman approached, tears in her eyes. "You're Henry, aren't you? Thank you. My father's getting tests here we couldn't afford anywhere else." Overcome, Henry only managed a nod. Her gratitude said it all. That afternoon, Emily found him hunched over his sketches in the barn. She teased him for playing architect. He explained about the therapy garden plan, expecting a good-natured laugh. Instead, her eyes shone. "That's brilliant, Pa. I'll paint stepping stones if you like." They spent the next hour brainstorming. She suggested an area for children to feed small animals, maybe goats or rabbits. Henry reminded her that the hospital might not appreciate livestock wandering around, but he jotted the idea with a grin. Perhaps something scaled down might work. On the day of the planning committee, he arrived at a small conference room in the new wing, expecting only a few folks. Instead, a lively group of doctors, volunteers, and local educators awaited. Dr. Brooks introduced everyone, and Henry's pulse quickened at the mention of Dr. Carla Mayfield, the visiting child development specialist. She was a petite woman with a friendly manner, speaking passionately about how nature and gardening benefited kids' emotional well-being. "I'm told you have farming expertise," she said to Henry, glancing at him warmly. I can't wait to see your ideas. Henry fumbled with the folded sketches. He laid them out on a table, apologizing for the rough lines. Yet as Dr. Mayfield examined them, her face lit. "This is wonderful," she exclaimed, pointing at the drawn plan for raised beds. "You've chosen plants ideal for tactile stimulation, and that gentle slope for wheelchair access is perfect. Did you design that on your own?" Henry coughed, flustered. "I guess so. I've just known the land a while. Figured it might help the kids." Dr. Mayfield turned to the group. "We must incorporate all of this. Henry's got a gift." They spent hours refining details, from walkway materials to potential shade structures. The enthusiasm in the room was palpable. By the end, Henry had been assigned co-lead of the project, collaborating with Dr. Mayfield's team. Though the title felt grand, he couldn't deny the excitement brewing inside. Stepping out of the meeting, he nearly bumped into Anna, who was waiting in the corridor with a bright smile. "I heard you're heading up the garden initiative. Congratulations." He gave a sheepish shrug. "Hardly leading. More like just helping." Anna laughed gently. "You keep saying that, but from where I stand, you're spearheading a lot." When the weekend arrived, Henry received a phone call from a local news channel. They'd heard about the therapy garden, wanted an interview, maybe a segment on new expansions. Henry hesitated but remembered the success of his prior talk. He politely agreed, as it might attract new supporters or donors. Emily teased him that soon he'd be more famous than any country singer in the region. He joked back that he'd keep daydreaming about that. On interview day, a reporter and camera operator arrived at the hospital courtyard. Dr. Brooks stood nearby, beaming. Henry found the entire filming process unnerving, especially the bright camera lights and the reporter's lively manner. "So, Henry," the reporter began, "I understand you're the visionary behind the upcoming pediatric therapy garden. How does a farmer come up with a hospital project like this?" Henry inhaled, choosing his words. "I've been around growing things my whole life. Watching seeds thrive taught me that nurturing helps everything flourish, kids included." The reporter continued. "And this entire turnaround started with your anonymous donation. Did you ever imagine it would lead to all this?" Henry paused, recalling those early days. "No, ma'am. I only hoped the hospital could survive for people who needed it. I never thought the world would notice or that we'd have this level of support. But it shows how one small step can create a big ripple." The final question came swiftly. "Any message for viewers about small acts of generosity?" Henry's cheeks warmed. "Just that we all have something to give. Maybe it's money, maybe it's time or skill. You never know how far it can go." Dr. Brooks gave him an approving nod. The reporter wrapped up, promising the segment would air soon. Henry exhaled as the camera turned off, relieved the ordeal was done. Dr. Brooks patted his shoulder. "Beautifully said." Following the interview, talk of the therapy garden spread. Local hardware stores donated materials, seeds, and tools. A landscaping company offered labor for free. A mother whose child recovered from a difficult illness brought chairs she'd refinished. Each day, deliveries arrived, piling up behind the hospital. Henry soon found himself balancing normal farm duties with garden planning. Emily accompanied him most days, painting whimsical signs to label the future flower patches. One morning, Dr. Mayfield approached Henry with a new idea. "We might incorporate sensory stations for children with special needs, like textured pathways or a small fountain for gentle sound therapy." Henry agreed enthusiastically, though he knew little about special needs. "You show me how, I'll figure out the building," he said. She beamed, tapping her notebook. "Working with you reminds me how crucial local wisdom is in these projects." Henry realized the hospital's transformation was about more than technology. It was about bridging knowledge across different walks of life. As weeks passed, The designated outdoor space behind the East Wing came alive with volunteer crews leveling ground, erecting wooden frameworks for raised beds, and installing a simple irrigation line that Henry devised. The chatter of hammers blended with the distant beep of hospital equipment. Now and then, curious patients peered from windows, watching the garden bloom. Henry could hardly believe how seamlessly farmland culture integrated with modern medicine. One evening, after a long day of hauling soil and building planters, Henry trudged through the hospital corridors. His muscles ached, but a sense of satisfaction filled his heart. By chance, he overheard a nurse telling a young mother that, soon, children in recovery could safely venture into the garden for gentle exercise. "I'm sure they'll love seeing flowers," the nurse added. Henry stifled a grin. He remembered the first time Emily chased butterflies near their fields. Maybe other children would find that same joy now. His phone buzzed, Malcolm's name on the screen. Henry stepped outside to answer. Malcolm's voice crackled with excitement. "Henry, we've received inquiries from multiple places. They heard about your therapy garden and want to replicate it. Could you share design details?" Henry felt a tingle. "Sure, I'll pass them along. Didn't think it was that special." Malcolm chuckled. "You underestimate how unique it is. Rural hospitals rarely attempt such expansions. You've sparked a movement." After the call, Henry gazed at the nearly completed frames, newly filled with dark, fertile soil. He recalled how his donation began as a whispered prayer in an empty hallway. Now the echo of that prayer spanned counties, maybe states. He found Emily kneeling at a bed of marigolds, tucking seeds into fresh earth. She looked up. "Isn't it amazing, Pa? I hope the kids can plant seeds of their own soon." Henry knelt beside her. "They will, and we'll show them how to nurture each one." They stayed there until dusk, father and daughter working side by side. The sky turned peach and lavender, a gentle hush enveloping them. A breeze carried the scent of tilled soil and blossoms, reminding Henry that growth was both patient and miraculous. As he stood and brushed dirt off his knees, he recognized a deeper truth. Seeds might be small, but their impact could stretch far beyond what anyone imagined. The same was true of kindness. That weekend, the therapy garden's official unveiling approached, a date chosen to coincide with a community open house at the hospital. Staff buzzed with anticipation, eager to display the nearly finished project that united volunteers, philanthropic groups, and local businesses. Henry spent spare hours adding final touches, a bright patch of zinnias near the entrance, a row of colorfully painted stepping stones, and whimsical signs naming each bed. With every brushstroke, he recalled how a simple donation once seemed his only chance to help. Now, he saw just how far hope could travel. His heart brimmed with gratitude for each neighbor who contributed tools, seeds, or time, transforming a barren patch of land into something extraordinary. When Dr. Mayfield arrived, she marveled at how swiftly everything had come together. She knelt by lavender, breathing its soothing scent, then brushed dirt from her palms and said, "Imagine children here, touching leaves, smelling flowers, forgetting burdens for a moment." Henry smiled, recalling Emily's delight in open fields. At that spot, his daughter had insisted on bright daisies, claiming their vivid petals could lift spirits on even the darkest days. Now the blossoms glowed under morning sunbeams, testifying to the power of small gestures in making a place feel safe and welcoming. On the morning of the open house, Henry rose while darkness still blanketed the sky. He loaded his truck with seedlings donated by local farmers, along with wooden benches he'd refurbished. By sunrise, he was at the hospital, parking near the half-finished garden. Over several hours, he and Dr. Mayfield arranged plantings just so, each bed carefully positioned to ensure sunlight. Nearby, hospital staff prepared a table with fresh lemonade and cookies, intent on greeting visitors warmly. The transformation felt unreal. Only months before, this entire campus seemed doomed. Now, it was brimming with possibility. Emily arrived soon after, tugging a small wagon filled with chalk, ribbons, and a few potted marigolds she'd grown herself. She invited children to decorate the pathways, adding flashes of color and personal flair. "We can rinse it off later, but for now, let's cover the ground in brightness," she declared. Nurses from pediatrics nodded, picturing how these creative drawings might calm anxious hearts. Henry watched Emily guide volunteers with unexpected poise. Each swirl of pastel chalk and every ribbon fluttering in the breeze whispered that fresh life was taking root. By noon, the hospital's lobby overflowed with visitors, neighbors, patient families, and a few curious folks who'd driven in from neighboring counties. Dr. Brooks led casual tours, pointing out refurbished hallways, new diagnostic machines, and success stories from the Philanthropic Foundation. Henry stood near the garden entrance, waving to friends from church and strangers who recognized him from news clips. Some tried to praise his generosity, but he insisted others had done the real work, hauling soil and painting murals. He believed that true progress took shape when everyday people linked arms, refusing to let a dream die. Around early afternoon, Dr. Mayfield took the microphone for a brief dedication. She spoke about healing that extended beyond standard care, explaining how hands-on experiences like planting, harvesting, and smelling fragrant herbs could nurture children's spirits. She thanked Henry for his garden design and highlighted Emily's colorful additions. Applause rippled through the crowd as Henry's cheeks flushed. Dr. Brooks then invited him to speak, and though his pulse hammered, he drew courage from the memory of telling his story at the donor conference. "I'm no speechmaker," he said, scanning the friendly faces, "but this garden is proof of what can happen when a community unites around kindness. It started with a few seeds, literal and otherwise, plus the notion that we're responsible for one another." He gestured toward the children, some with casts or bandaged arms. "Here's hoping you'll find a bit of peace among these flowers, just like I do when I'm out in my fields." Soft murmurs of approval swept the gathering, followed by more applause. As the cheers died down, families drifted into the garden. They touched fuzzy leaves of sage, sniffed rows of mint, and admired bright daisies nodding in the breeze. A small girl squealed when a butterfly danced around her wrist. Teenagers hurried to chalk new designs, weaving stars and hearts along the walkway. The sky above shone a clear, brilliant blue, as though nature herself had blessed the day. Henry spotted Dr. Mayfield smiling quietly, and even Dr. Brooks dabbed her eyes, relieved to witness her hospital's rebirth firsthand. Once the dedication concluded, Henry noticed a trio of visitors hovering near the fence. They wore neat outfits and carried clipboards, their expressions intent. Anna slipped over and murmured that these were representatives from other rural clinics, hoping to replicate Clarksfield's garden concept. Henry felt a twinge of nerves, but summoned his resolve. If explaining how they'd accomplished this project could help others, he was ready. He introduced himself, meeting the polite gaze of Clara Barnes, a poised woman who asked pointed questions about costs, soil conditions, and climate concerns. Henry answered as best he could, referencing knowledge gleaned from years of tending farmland. Clara jotted notes, occasionally smiling at how straightforward he made it sound. Another person inquired about how they'd raised initial funds. Henry paused, recalling that first anonymous envelope. "You don't always start big," he replied. "Sometimes you just do what you can and trust people to join in." An hour later, Henry found himself drained, but exhilarated, stepping aside to catch a moment of quiet under a tall oak. Children's laughter still drifted from the newly christened paths. Emily dashed past, guiding two smaller kids toward an art station. Less than a year ago, he had worried that this hospital might vanish. Now it brimmed with color, possibility, and the wonder of renewed life. His phone vibrated, revealing a message from Malcolm praising the event and hinting at future expansions. That evening, after the open house ended, Henry stayed behind to help with cleanup. Staff folded chairs, gathered ribbons, and washed chalky footprints off the walkway. The garden, however, remained intact, its raised beds and bright blossoms ready for tomorrow's sun. Finally home, Henry and Emily collapsed onto the living room couch. Outside, night insects sang their familiar lullaby, but inside, father and daughter wore matching smiles of tired gratitude. "Just the beginning," Emily murmured, resting her head on Henry's shoulder. "Imagine everything else we can build." He squeezed her hand, recalling nights he'd nearly given up. "We'll see how far it goes, kiddo," he said softly. "And we'll face it together." He flicked off the lamp, letting moonlight spill across the worn floorboards. In the hush, he thought of all the patients who would soon recover in a healing space filled with blossoms and sunshine. Their future felt wide open. Within a few days, fresh challenges arose. Calls trickled in from distant hospitals seeking advice, and the foundation asked Henry to consider visiting a neighboring county for a forum. Emily teased him about becoming a traveling garden guru, but Henry admitted he felt more at peace planting seeds at home than speaking in auditoriums. Anna encouraged him gently, reminding him that each new project could brighten countless lives. Yet Henry never forgot what truly mattered: the quiet moments when a farmer's heart recognized a need. One afternoon he wandered behind his barn, remembering the day he'd gathered every dollar for that anonymous envelope. It had been an act of desperation cloaked in faith, with no expectation of glory. Now, gazing at the setting sun, he realized that single moment had unleashed a chain reaction of hope across miles. A month later, the therapy garden was in full bloom. Children from the pediatric wing ventured outside with nurses, their eyes lighting up at each vibrant display of color. Some giggled while watering seedlings, others scooted along the smooth path in wheelchairs, arms outstretched to brush against soft leaves. Dr. Mayfield documented progress, eagerly sharing photos with colleagues nationwide. She believed the project's success would inspire a wave of nature-based healing efforts. Meanwhile, Henry stood at the edge, quietly directing volunteers who replaced wilted plants or repainted chipped signs. He seldom drew attention, but people gravitated to him for guidance. Even the children approached, trusting the gentle man in dusty boots who knelt to show them how to cradle a tender sprout. In those moments, Henry felt no fear of public speaking, no anxiety about the future, only gratitude for this simple gift of caring. One late afternoon, Dr. Brooks found him tidying the herb patch. She told him the hospital board had voted to officially name the garden Dawson's Grove in honor of his compassion. Henry nearly dropped his trowel, flustered. "That's too much," he protested. But Dr. Brooks smiled. "You lit the first spark. Let us remember it." News spread swiftly. On the day the plaque arrived, staff and families gathered to watch Henry, red-faced but moved, accept a small token of thanks. That night he and Emily lingered in the garden long after visitors left. Soft lanterns cast golden circles on the ground, revealing the colors of day in hushed silhouettes. Emily traced a finger over the new plaque, tears glistening. "Dawson's Grove," she whispered, leaning her head on her father's arm. He wrapped an arm around her, remembering how he once believed he had nothing to give. "Never expected all this," he murmured. "But I'm grateful we found the courage to share what little we had." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves, carrying the faint fragrance of lavender and mint. Overhead, stars winked in silent agreement. Henry closed his eyes, thinking of how many seeds, literal and figurative, he had planted in recent months. Each seed was a promise, an act of hope. And in Clarksfield, those seeds had truly blossomed, shaping a brighter, kinder future than anyone thought possible. Summer stretched its arms across Clarksfield County, ushering in golden afternoons and breezes that ruffled fields of newly blossomed crops. Henry Dawson stood by the edge of Dawson's Grove, admiring how the hospital's therapy garden teemed with life. Children chattered excitedly as they watered marigolds and petunias, while parents exchanged grateful smiles over the walkway painted with chalk designs. Though Henry rarely sought credit, the engraved plaque bearing his name glinted in the sunshine, a symbol of how simple acts could spark grand transformations. He inhaled the gentle scents of mint and lavender, remembering that not long ago he had hoped to keep the hospital's doors open. Now, the facility bustled with new staff, advanced equipment, and even Henry's neighbors said the place felt more like a beacon than a building. As the warmth of the sun bathed his shoulders, Henry let himself believe this might be a new beginning. Henry had no illusions about life being easy now, but he couldn't ignore the signs of real, lasting change. Each morning brought new inquiries from rural clinics wishing to replicate Dawson's Grove or from donors hoping to support more improvements. Sometimes the attention left him breathless, yet he refused to turn away. The hospital staff, led by Dr. Brooks, continued expanding services, even scheduling specialist visits once a week so residents no longer needed lengthy trips. Meanwhile, the therapy garden bustled with daily activity. Children in wheelchairs sampling fresh mint leaves, parents learning that kale grew well in Clarksfield soil, and nurses guiding small steps toward recovery. Through it all, Henry found solace in the familiar rhythms of farm life. When he felt overwhelmed, he returned to his fields, checking rows of sweet corn or coaxing his aging tractor back to life, grounding himself in the land that shaped him. One balmy afternoon, Anna drove out to the farm for a scheduled visit. Seated at Henry's rickety table, she unfurled brochures detailing a new philanthropic opportunity, a traveling exhibit on rural healthcare innovations, with Dawson's Grove at the forefront. The exhibit would tour regional fairs and medical conferences, showcasing how smaller hospitals could blossom with the right support. Anna invited Henry to contribute photos, short anecdotes, and maybe an appearance when the tour reached Clarksfield's neighboring county. At first he hesitated, picturing himself miles away from the quiet barns and fields. But Anna spoke gently of how lives might be changed if more people saw a tangible path forward. Something in her earnest eyes reminded him of the night he'd slipped that plain envelope on the hospital's counter. So he firmly agreed, promising to gather images of the garden and a few personal reflections on how hope had taken root. Emily decided to help curate the exhibit materials. She roamed Dawson's Grove, snapping pictures of children lost in wonder at the blooms, parents relaxing on homemade benches, and the gentle swirl of color where painted stones dotted the paths. In the barn, they pored over each shot, selecting ones that best illustrated the garden's spirit. Henry, with a half smile, suggested they include photos of neighbors collaborating, ensuring the story was about collective effort, not just him. Emily agreed, printing small captions explaining how a handful of volunteers had given hours of sweat, wonder, and laughter to bring every inch of greenery to life. Each evening, she arranged them into a makeshift portfolio, adding Henry's scribbled observations. When Anna saw their work, she exclaimed that it brought the garden to life, reminding viewers that real people and real hearts had turned a dream into something tangible and deeply healing to flourish. The exhibit's launch in the neighboring county soon arrived, held in a modest civic center. Anna and Henry drove there with Emily, who carried a box of prints and displays. Inside, they found rows of booths showcasing medical breakthroughs, alongside simple stands devoted to volunteer-driven projects. Dawson's Grove occupied a corner booth draped in soft green cloth, the photos arrayed on easels. Passers-by paused, intrigued by the bright images of children smiling among flowers. At first, Henry stood behind Anna, letting her greet visitors and explain the garden's genesis. But as soon as families asked about planting specifics, his farmer's instinct surfaced. He stepped forward, describing soil composition and the importance of accessible pathways. They stayed busy for hours, fielding questions, collecting brochures. By day's end, 3 separate hospital administrators had asked if Henry might advise them remotely, hoping to replicate that same spirit of calm, nurturing care and inspiration. After packing up, Henry wandered the fair, intrigued by other exhibits. A traveling nurse recounted how remote villages managed chronic conditions with simple telemedicine kits. Another booth showed an innovative mobile clinic. Everywhere he looked, he saw people striving to bridge gaps in healthcare, offering solutions once deemed impossible. Emily, enthralled, listened to a presentation on scholarships for small-town medical students, eyes shining at the idea of forging paths that led back home. Henry, noticing her spark, felt pride swirling with paternal protectiveness. He remembered how he once worried she'd have no choice but to leave Clarksfield for opportunities. Now perhaps the place they called home was worth returning to. When they finally headed out, a soft twilight fell over the parking lot. The drive back felt peaceful, with Anna's quiet humming and Emily's gentle chatter weaving a tapestry of hope. Henry smiled to himself, feeling something profound taking shape. Returning to Clarksfield, Henry discovered a flurry of activity awaiting him. Dr. Brooks sent news that more specialists wanted to join the hospital on rotation, ensuring families could access everything from cardiology to orthopedics without a lengthy trip. Meanwhile, the new therapy garden thrived beyond expectation, with staff noting quicker recoveries and improved spirits in pediatric cases. Local schools arranged field trips, letting students see how science and compassion intermingled among blossoms and planters. Even older folks ambled through, watering herbs or chatting with patients. The hum of shared purpose echoed in every hallway. One afternoon, Henry spotted Mrs. Turner, who once only tottered with a cane, now helping a boy place marigold seeds in fresh soil. He paused, marveling at the transformation of not just the hospital, but the entire community. This was bigger than him, bigger than any single donation. It felt like a united heartbeat for hope. That same week, Anna forwarded an invitation for Henry to speak at a statewide rural healthcare summit. The thought of another speaking engagement unsettled him, but Emily insisted he accept. "Pa, remember how your words moved folks last time?" she reminded gently. "They need to know a farmer's perspective." So, once again, Henry mustered courage. He stood before a packed auditorium describing how his envelope had become a catalyst for transformation, how a handful of caring strangers lit a spark that continued to grow. This time, he felt calmer, pausing to share small anecdotes about gleaning leftover seeds, about local families who contributed tools. Each story painted a vivid picture of communal effort. By the time he finished, the applause felt warm and genuine. Attendees queued up afterward, eager to replicate everything from advanced imaging equipment to simple therapy gardens. Henry walked away convinced that every kind act deeply mattered. Late one evening, Henry wandered Dawson's Grove under a moonlit sky. Sprinklers ticked softly, watering rows of blossoms. From the hospital windows, faint lights glowed where nurses did their rounds. He paused before the plaque bearing his name, remembering that moment when he'd handed over everything he had. In that hush, he felt every struggling farmer, every worried parent, every anxious patient who might find solace in these blossoms. He whispered his thanks to the land, to the friends who believed, and to the promise that love, shared freely, could outgrow even the tallest fences. Tomorrow, he thought, new seeds awaited. 2 months passed in a blur of steady progress for Clarksfield County Hospital. On bright mornings, Henry Dawson found himself balancing two worlds: his aging farm, which still demanded weeding, feeding, and the occasional mending of broken fences, and his unexpected new role as a figurehead of rural renewal. He often rose before dawn to tend the fields, then drove to the hospital to address questions from curious visitors or take conference calls with clinics far beyond Clarksfield's borders. Emily, entering her final high school year, juggled classes and volunteer shifts. Occasionally, Henry glimpsed her daydreaming about future possibilities, perhaps studying healthcare or social work, hoping one day to return with even more knowledge to help the hospital. He teased her gently that she should try normal teenage activities, but she only laughed, pointing out that Clarksfield's transformation was pretty normal for me now, Pa. In her spare time, she continued painting bright murals along the garden's perimeter, transforming once blank walls into vibrant panoramas of rolling fields, sunsets, and happy families. One mild afternoon, Henry joined Dr. Brooks in her modest office. She gestured to a stack of documents on her desk. "We're finalizing expansion plans for a small rehabilitation wing," she explained, her voice glowing with excitement. "The therapy garden has proven so beneficial. We want to create indoor spaces for physical therapy, too. Treadmills, specialized machines, things patients can use even during harsh winters." She handed Henry a pamphlet. "We've already secured partial funding through the foundation, but your testimony might help secure the rest." Henry took the pamphlet, flipping through sketches of bright, accessible rooms. He pictured patients in wheelchairs navigating sturdy rails, learning to walk again beneath supportive staff. "We've come so far," he murmured. "Just last year, the hospital struggled to pay for basic supplies. Now you're talking expansions." Dr. Brooks nodded with gratitude. "I won't forget where it all began, Henry. You lit a candle that set the whole county aglow." Embarrassed, he tried to shrug off the praise, but she only smiled. "We all have different gifts. Yours was a simple nudge. Let me know when you're ready to share that nudge with more donors." A week later, Anna called him about a potential fundraiser at a city convention center, a full day's drive away. Wealthy supporters from several states would gather, eager to hear success stories. "It's bigger than anything you've done before," she warned. "But it could help secure the rehab wing's funding. We'll be with you every step." Henry felt a wave of nerves, remembering his shaky moments at earlier conferences. Yet each time he'd spoken, hearts opened. He agreed, though he dreaded leaving Emily and the farm for more than a night. "I'll manage chores," Emily insisted, "and I'll feed the chickens just fine, Pa." Her grin melted his hesitation. So, early on a cool autumn morning, Henry climbed into a foundation-sponsored SUV with Malcolm and Anna at the wheel. He gazed at fields painted amber by newly turned leaves, feeling the tug of home as they traveled the highway. The city soon loomed large, steel and glass towers dwarfed by constant traffic, so different from Clarksfield's quiet roads. They pulled up to a polished hotel attached to the convention center. Valets bustled, and Henry's heart knocked faster. He took a deep breath, clutching a small folder containing photos and notes about the rehab wing. Inside the lobby, suits and dresses hurried across marbled floors. Conference signs hung overhead, detailing sessions on philanthropy, education, and healthcare transformations. Malcolm guided Henry to the main hall, where caterers arranged linen-draped tables and tested microphones. A program listed Henry's name alongside prominent doctors and charity directors. Anna checked her watch, smiling in reassurance. "They've scheduled you mid-afternoon, so let's sit in on a few panels until then. You can see the crowd. Get comfortable." Henry nodded, trying not to imagine tripping on stage. The first panel featured renowned medical researchers discussing breakthroughs in remote diagnostics. Henry found it fascinating and humbling, a far cry from the simpler approach at Clarksfield's hospital. Even so, their message was clear. Communities flourished when they embraced new technology and collective effort. As the morning wore on, Henry discovered a surprising sense of camaraderie among attendees. A few recognized him from media coverage of Dawson's Grove, shaking his hand and expressing admiration. He did his best to respond politely, still unused to praise from strangers in fancy attire. By midday, the conference schedule led them into a grand banquet hall. Round tables circled a raised dais, the edges crowded with cameras and sound equipment. A large projector screen displayed the event's title, Seeds of Change, Transforming Small Communities Through Innovation. Henry's pulse ratcheted up a notch. This was it. When his turn came, he'd be standing under those lights again. Anna gently patted his arm. "You've done this before," she whispered. "People need your authenticity." He mustered a stiff grin, taking a seat at their assigned table. Soon, speakers rotated through, recounting success stories from across the region. A community center revitalized by volunteers, a rural library saved by a single benefactor, an innovative telemedicine pilot in remote Appalachia. Henry felt some relief that he wasn't alone in championing local change. Then the MC approached the mic. Next, we welcome Henry Dawson, the Clarksfield farmer who inspired an outpouring of support that saved his county hospital and birthed the celebrated therapy garden. Applause rose, and Henry's stomach fluttered. He rose, fixing his gaze on Anna and Malcolm's encouraging faces, then strode to the stage. The light shone with a fierce glare, momentarily disorienting him. He cleared his throat, gripping the lectern just as he'd done before. Soft hush fell as attendees leaned in. "I'm just a farmer," he began, voice taut. "I'd never dreamed of speaking in front of you kind folks. But let me share a story, one I hope might spark something in your own communities." Gradually, he recounted the hospital's dire state, his decision to quietly donate what little he had, and the remarkable chain of events that followed. He wove in how the therapy garden grew from volunteers' hearts, and how advanced equipment arrived through collective goodwill. As he spoke, the earlier nerves receded. He forgot about the suit jackets and fancy dresses, picturing the wide eyes of sick children marveling at colorful blossoms. He remembered Dr. Brooks's grateful smile the day brand-new machinery rolled in. Halfway through, he pulled out a small photo from his folder, showing the hospital's once bleak exterior. Then he displayed a more recent snapshot of Dawson's Grove bursting with sunflowers and children racing along the paths. Gasps and murmured admiration rippled across the auditorium. Henry took a calming breath, concluding, "I'm no expert, but I've learned when one person opens a door, even just a crack, others rush through carrying gifts you never imagined. The folks in my hometown taught me that real wealth lies in compassion and community spirit. If something I said encourages you to act, then Clarksfield's story doesn't end with us, it begins with you." He offered a slight bow. Applause thundered, some people rising from their chairs, eyes misted in the crowd. Heart pounding, Henry stepped back, relieved and overwhelmed, exhaling a silent, "Thank you." Returning to the table, he scarcely had time to sink into his chair before event volunteers and donors approached him, voices excited. They asked how they could replicate the therapy garden, or what smaller gestures might spark similar miracles. Anna discreetly slipped him a notepad to jot contact details. So many hands thrust business cards at him that his pockets overflowed. Malcolm grinned proudly. "See, you've moved them," he said in a low voice. "We might secure the rehab wing funding sooner than expected." Henry couldn't deny the warm glow creeping into his chest. By day's end, he was exhausted but content. The conference wound down with a final networking session. As Henry sipped water by a tall window, a quiet voice greeted him. He turned to see a woman with silver-streaked hair, her demeanor reserved but earnest. She introduced herself as Patricia Hardy, a former nurse from a struggling county 3 hours north. "I've read about you," she said. "Our clinic's on the brink of closure, and we have no major donors, but your story gives me courage. Think you'd ever come visit?" Henry paused, mind whirling. Already he was pulled between obligations to farm and hospital, not to mention occasional speaking requests. Yet the woman's sincere eyes mirrored the same desperation he'd once known. So he nodded. "If it helps, sure. Let's talk details." Her relieved smile illuminated years of worry. They exchanged numbers. Henry silently prayed he could honor all these requests without losing himself. Late that evening, Henry collapsed into a hotel bed, mind replaying the day's applause and questions. He felt both elated and burdened. He understood now that generosity was never one and done. It called for constant nurturing. New clinics and hospitals needed guidance. Emily still needed him at home. The farm depended on his careful stewardship. As he drifted to sleep, he resolved to keep faith that each step he took, however small, mattered deeply to someone. Those seeds would keep sprouting if he trusted the soil of human kindness. The next morning, he and Anna walked out of the hotel into early sunshine. Malcolm waited by the SUV, loading their bags. Henry inhaled crisp air tinged with city bustle, longing for the simpler sense of farmland. Anna checked her phone. Messages from donors poured in, praising Henry's speech. "Ready to go home?" she asked. Henry's face warmed with an easy smile. More than ready. There was a whole life waiting for him back in Clarksfield. The hospital, Dawson's Grove, Emily, and the gentle fields that started this journey. He couldn't wait to see them all again. Henry Dawson returned to Clarksfield at twilight, watching the horizon fade into gentle purples and blues. As soon as he stepped from the SUV, he inhaled the crisp country air that eased his tension. Malcolm helped unload his bag, and Anna offered a parting hug, promising to relay updates on the funds for the rehabilitation wing. Henry thanked them both, then trudged inside his farmhouse. Emily rushed to greet him, grin radiant as she reported the chickens had been well fed and the fields looked in fine shape. He hugged her back, murmuring how good it felt to be home. The next morning, Henry woke early and padded outside in worn boots. The fields were dewy in the pale light, each blade of grass shimmering. He inspected his rows of corn, satisfied that the soil was healthy. The distant chirping of birds reminded him that, no matter how far he traveled, this land remained his anchor. After chores, he cleaned up and headed toward the hospital, curious how Dr. Brooks had fared in his absence. Driving along the winding road, he savored the hush of farmland, stretching in every direction. Everything felt simpler here, though he knew complexities awaited him at the hospital. When Henry arrived, the front parking lot was unexpectedly busy. He found Dr. Brooks in the lobby, her face lit with excitement. "We've just had a group of prospective staffers visit," she explained. "A wave of new nurses and a couple of doctors interested in practicing here. The foundation recommended them, but they wanted to see the hospital firsthand." Henry's eyebrows rose. "They're all from out of town?" Dr. Brooks nodded, joy and disbelief evident in her voice. "Indeed. We've never had so many people wanting to relocate to Clarksfield to work." Henry grinned. "Means we're doing something right." They walked together through corridors filled with signs of progress, passing by the therapy garden entrance. Henry smiled at glimpses of children exploring the crisp morning air among the flowers. The ripple effect of that single donation still astonished him. He turned to Dr. Brooks. "I've been worried about staff burnout, but if new hires arrive, that could ease the strain." She nodded. "Exactly. We'll finalize details soon. And Henry, they specifically said your story inspired them to practice rural medicine." Henry blushed, unsure how to accept such praise. He followed Dr. Brooks down a newly painted hallway and into the room designated for the planned rehabilitation wing. Though still empty and echoing with footsteps, the space brimmed with potential. She explained how physical therapists could guide patients through advanced exercises, using equipment that had seemed out of reach mere months before. Funding might arrive sooner than expected thanks to Henry's trip. "No official word yet," she cautioned, "but the donors you met sound very interested." As they spoke, footsteps approached, and Anna appeared, face bright with news. "Henry," she called, "we heard from those big donors. They want to set up a matching fund campaign. If the county can raise half, they'll provide the rest for the rehab wing." Dr. Brooks gave a short laugh, as though this was all too good to be true. Henry, on the other hand, felt his stomach tighten. Half the cost? That still meant a substantial sum. While local folks had proven generous, he worried they might feel tapped out after everything else. Yet Dr. Brooks placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll manage. We've done bigger miracles." Within days, the county bristled with fresh fundraising ideas. Schools organized benefit concerts, churches passed special collections, and the mayor launched a Rebuild for Tomorrow campaign. Everyone seemed eager to contribute, mindful of how far they had come. Henry attended a few brainstorming sessions, offering that the therapy garden alone had started from nothing but seeds and willpower. The spirit of cooperation soared, though Henry sensed an undercurrent of fatigue among longtime volunteers. After all, they had poured themselves into saving the hospital once. Now they were asked to dig deeper for yet another expansion. Emily, noticing Henry's worry, encouraged him. "Pa, let's think of creative ways so folks don't feel pressured. Maybe smaller donations from a lot of people will lighten the load." She proposed an old-fashioned harvest fair at the hospital grounds, where local farmers could sell produce, crafters could display goods, and a portion of each sale would go to the rehab wing. Henry liked the idea, merging farm life with fundraising. Dr. Brooks approved wholeheartedly, and soon the Clarksfield Harvest for Health Fair began taking shape. Autumn breezes swept through town, carrying the scent of turning leaves. Emily led a band of teenagers in decorating the hospital's lawns with hay bales, scarecrows, and strings of corn husks. Families volunteered booths, selling homemade pies, jams, and quilts. Henry spent spare afternoons tinkering with a battered cider press he'd rescued from a neighbor's shed, determined to provide fresh-pressed cider for visitors. Even the foundation pitched in, shipping a sturdy outdoor canopy and extra signage. On the morning of the fair, Clarksfield awoke to a warm sun and clear sky. Vendors arrived early, setting up tables beneath fluttering banners that read, "Harvest for Health." The gentle strum of acoustic guitars resonated as local musicians tested their instruments. Children scampered around the therapy garden, where staff set up a small pet-a-bunny enclosure for them to enjoy. Henry and Emily manned the cider station, laughing at the squeals of those who tried operating the old press. Even Dr. Brooks wore a straw hat, greeting visitors with a wide smile. The air felt thick with gratitude and community. Within an hour, the fair buzzed with life. Shoppers haggled over fresh vegetables, orchard apples, and crocheted blankets. A portion of every purchase funneled into the rehab fund, accompanied by small donation jars scattered around each stall. Anna strolled from booth to booth, recording donation amounts with a discreet nod. Malcolm arrived, eyes twinkling as he joined Henry in handing out paper cups of cider. Despite the swirl of activity, the atmosphere stayed light, a far cry from the uneasy tension that once haunted the hospital's halls. During a lull, Henry gazed around, heart swelling at the turnout. Familiar faces from the church rummage sale, new families from out of county, and curious passers-by all converged here to support the next big dream. In a quiet corner, he noticed Dr. Mayfield chatting animatedly with parents, praising the therapy garden's success. A swirl of leaves blew past, rustling the bright banners overhead. He couldn't help smiling at how seamlessly farmland traditions and advanced healthcare goals had fused into one joyous tapestry. Later, a small stage set up near the front steps beckoned local musicians to perform. Emily introduced a teenage fiddler who played a spirited tune, drawing applause and foot-tapping from the crowd. Then a teacher from the elementary school led children in a short harvest song. Families clapped in encouragement, many glancing at the hospital behind them, reminded of how crucial these expansions could be. Henry watched Dr. Brooks wipe her eyes at one point, overwhelmed by how the community had rallied once again. Throughout the afternoon, donations steadily accumulated. Anna confided in Henry that they were already halfway toward the local portion. By evening, a golden sunset painted the sky. Lanterns swayed, illuminating final bursts of laughter and singing. Exhausted volunteers began tearing down booths as stragglers lingered to enjoy the last of the cider. Henry's back ached, but his spirit soared. He overheard a woman exclaim that Clarksfield truly felt unstoppable now, a haven for those determined to help one another. Once the fair ended, Henry and Emily stacked bales of hay, clearing the grounds so hospital staff could easily transition to normal operations. Dr. Brooks approached them, tears shimmering. We counted the donations. Combined with pre-sales and pledge cards, we've surpassed the local target, which means once matched by the donors, the rehab wing is fully funded. She added that an official press release would go out soon, but Henry hardly needed publicity. A wave of relief swept him, remembering his earlier fears of overburdening neighbors. They'd done it again, step by determined step. After cleaning up, father and daughter stole a few minutes in Dawson's Grove. Twilight fell softly, coloring the garden in dusky purples. They settled on a bench near rows of marigolds, letting the hush soothe them. The day had been long, but the sense of satisfaction glowed like embers in Henry's chest. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. "We keep planting seeds, Pa," she whispered, "and they keep growing into something bigger than we imagined." He ruffled her hair gently. "That's the lesson I'm learning over and over. We just keep giving what we can, trusting it'll flourish." Across the garden, lights from hospital windows glimmered. Tomorrow, the staff would begin planning next steps for the rehab wing's construction. Families would eventually fill those halls, forging new paths to recovery. Henry wondered if one day older kids would return as professionals to serve the place that cared for them in childhood. He breathed in the floral scent, cherishing the peaceful conclusion to a bustling day. He and Emily finally rose, heading back to the truck under a canopy of stars. On the drive home, they passed farmland, tinged silver by moonlight. Henry listened to the gentle hum of tires on gravel, thinking of all the transformations that had swept Clarksfield since that first envelope. Quiet generosity had unleashed a bright tide of hope, proving that ordinary hands could build extraordinary things. Emily fell asleep against the window, and Henry felt a pang of gratitude for how she'd grown, confident, compassionate, unafraid to dream. Soon the farmhouse lights welcomed them, a simple reminder that life carried on day by day. In bed, Henry found sleep slow in coming. He felt too grateful, too alive to drift off immediately. Instead, he replayed the fair's moments. The cheerful chaos of visitors, the rainbow of fresh produce, the swirl of leaves. It was worth every ache in his back to see such unity. Eventually, he closed his eyes, lulled by the chorus of crickets. Another milestone had been reached, and tomorrow would bring new endeavors. He vowed, as dreams overtook him, to never underestimate the power of a small, faithful seed placed in fertile ground. The weeks following the Harvest for Health Fair brought a steady hum of optimism throughout Clarksfield County. Construction crews broke ground on the new rehabilitation wing, their machines rumbling beside the hospital as workers in hard hats laid foundations and erected steel beams. Every morning, Henry Dawson paused by the chain-link fence, marveling that only a few months earlier, the hospital itself had been on the verge of closing its doors. Now, a new addition was rising, promising advanced therapies for patients who once would have traveled many hours for care. He often found Dr. Brooks outside too, walking the perimeter with a clipboard, capturing each phase of progress. Whenever she spotted Henry, she waved him over, eager to share the day's updates about structural timelines, equipment shipments, or new hires who had just signed on. With the Harvest for Health Fair behind them, the town settled back into a gentler routine, though excitement still buzzed beneath the surface. Farmers returned to their fields, grateful for a fruitful season, while local families savored a respite from constant fundraising events. Emily resumed her studies with renewed vigor, often poring over biology texts at the kitchen table. She spoke of possibly applying to universities nearby, but Henry sensed a tug in her heart that always led her back to Clarksfield. Seeing her devotion to the hospital, he had little doubt she might someday become one of its most dedicated caregivers. One breezy afternoon, Henry decided to pay a visit to Dr. Mayfield in Dawson's Grove. She had been tracking the therapy garden's impact on children's recovery, compiling data for a paper she hoped to present at a national health conference. Henry found her kneeling near the rows of herbs, jotting notes while a young boy nearby practiced walking short distances along a raised path. A nurse stood by, gently encouraging him to take more steps. The boy's mother looked on with teary-eyed gratitude. Dr. Mayfield waved Henry closer, showing him charts that tracked the boy's progress. "He's made extraordinary gains," she murmured. "Some therapists say it's just the new methods, but I believe the garden's peaceful environment helps too." Henry glanced at the child's hesitant grin each time he managed another foot of distance. "It's probably both," he said quietly, recalling how nature soothed people's worries in ways that technology alone couldn't replicate. Moments like these reminded him why the expansions mattered. They were changing real lives, not just building impressive structures. Dr. Mayfield then mentioned that in 2 weeks, she planned to visit a national conference to showcase Clarksfield's success. "I'd love to include your perspective, Henry," she added. "Even a short quote about what inspired you might deepen my presentation." He chuckled. "I'm flattered, but you're the expert. Still, I'm happy to help." Early the next day, Anna phoned Henry, voice brimming with energy. "Good news. A few philanthropic groups want to tour the hospital and therapy garden. They're from different states, each eager to replicate these concepts. Could we arrange a show-and-tell day?" Henry laughed. "Like we're teachers hosting a field trip." Anna replied that it wasn't so different. These visitors wanted to see authenticity. He agreed readily, remembering Patricia Hardy, the former nurse who'd invited him to speak in her county. If showing people around meant more small hospitals could be revived, he was all for it. When the visitors arrived, Dr. Brooks organized them into small clusters for guided tours, with Henry and Emily helping answer questions about Dawson's Grove. Some visitors were healthcare administrators, while others represented charities. A few, Henry recognized, were simply wealthy individuals searching for meaningful projects to support. He watched them marvel at the bright murals, the carefully designed pathways, and the raised planters teeming with flowers. One older gentleman, stooped by age, touched the petals of a sunflower and shook his head in awe. "My wife would have adored this place," he murmured. By the end of the tour, many openly expressed their desire to build something similar back home. Emily handed out small info packets with planting tips and accessible design ideas, beaming with pride. While Henry managed these new roles, the demands of his farm persisted. Weeds didn't stop sprouting, just because he had speaking engagements. So each afternoon, after hospital duties, he raced back to his fields. Emily joined him when she could, lugging feed sacks for the chickens or helping harvest vegetables for market. The soil, nourished by thoughtful irrigation, rewarded them with a healthy yield. He sold some produce at local stands, but inevitably ended up donating a portion to the hospital cafeteria, feeling it only right that patients benefit from the farmland's bounty. Late one evening, he sank onto the creaky front porch swing. Emily had gone to bed, and the hush of night embraced the property. He thought about how quickly life had shifted. From a lonely farmer with mounting debts to a pivotal figure bridging rural concerns and advanced medical care. Although satisfied, he sometimes worried he was stretching himself too thin. The farm needed him. The hospital needed him. Distant clinics asked for guidance, and people from all corners wrote letters seeking advice. He pulled a small stack of envelopes from his pocket. Requests for site visits, invitations to conferences, pleas for help replicating Dawson's Grove. He closed his eyes, balancing gratitude and anxiety. He didn't want to disappoint anyone, yet he also couldn't be everywhere at once. One letter in particular caught his eye. Patricia Hardy had written again, describing how her clinic was struggling with local politics and insufficient funds. She asked if Henry might come for a week to rally their community, share Clarksfield's story, and speak to officials about what compassion could accomplish. Henry sighed. He wanted to help, especially after seeing how her eyes had shone with hope at the big conference. But how could he leave his farm and the hospital expansions for so long? With a heavy heart, he tucked the letter away, promising himself he'd figure something out. The next morning, Dr. Brooks asked Henry to step into her office. She'd heard rumors about demands on his schedule and offered a gentle solution. "We could create a small group, a community outreach team, trained to present Clarksfield's success," she proposed. "You wouldn't have to bear that alone." Henry leaned forward, relief flickering. That might work. Folks like Emily, Dr. Mayfield, maybe some volunteers who helped build the garden. They can share their part of the story. Dr. Brooks nodded, excited. "Yes, exactly. We can rotate who travels, so no single person is overwhelmed. It's not just your burden." That afternoon, they convened an informal meeting in Dawson's Grove. Emily, Dr. Mayfield, a teacher who'd coordinated fundraising, and a few others joined them under the shade of a large oak. Together, they formed a plan. They'd set up a simple training program to help them present to outside communities. Each volunteer would handle a piece of Clarksfield's tale: medical upgrades, garden therapy, or grassroots organization. Henry would assist behind the scenes, but not always have to leave the farm. The group felt a surge of excitement, realizing they could spread hope without burning anyone out. Henry's shoulders eased at the thought of shared responsibility. Meanwhile, the rehab wing's construction progressed, with walls rising swiftly. Dr. Brooks guided Henry around the half-built halls, pointing out future therapy rooms and private areas for families. Each day, more equipment arrived in crates, ready to be installed once the space was weatherproof. Emily snapped photos of the transformation, planning to post updates for supporters. Local newspapers ran stories on how Clarksfield once teetered on ruin, but now built a state-of-the-art facility for rural residents. Henry noticed a fresh wave of patients traveling from neighboring counties, curious about the hospital's improvements and the famed therapy garden. By late autumn, the leaves began turning vibrant shades of orange and gold, swirling across the garden paths. Dawson's Grove took on a new, crisp beauty, as if nature shifted to accent its deeper hues. Patients bundled in sweaters still wandered outside, guided by nurses for fresh air. Some teachers even brought classes to observe how plants adapt in cooler weather. One chill afternoon, Henry strolled through with Dr. Mayfield, discussing winterproofing. "We can move certain fragile plants indoors," she said, "or cultivate a greenhouse extension." Henry raised his brows. A greenhouse? That's ambitious. But in Clarksfield, ambition had proven unstoppable when fueled by compassion. "Let's think it through," he replied, chuckling at how one idea led to another. That evening, he returned home to find Emily finalizing her college applications, flipping between forms with quiet determination. He realized how quickly the months had flown. Soon, she would be forging her own path, though he prayed she'd find her way back to Clarksfield, if that was her calling. They dined on simple soup, recounting the day's developments, each proud of how the other had grown. After dinner, they set up a jigsaw puzzle by lantern light. The picture on the box featured a sprawling wildflower field at dawn. Emily joked that it reminded her of their garden in another year's bloom. Henry laughed, picking up a piece that depicted a bright orange flower petal. "We're building a puzzle, sort of like life here," he mused, "piece by piece." She smirked, pressing a sky piece into place. "But we've learned any puzzle can be solved if everyone brings their bit." Henry nodded. That truth had carried them through adversity. Each neighbor, nurse, donor, and volunteer contributing unique skills. Sitting together in the soft glow, they felt a sense of unity that no storm could shake. Even if new challenges arose, the seeds of hope had sunk deep roots across the county. They'd keep sowing them wherever needed, trusting that fresh blossoms would appear with each season. Henry Dawson rose before dawn, heart pounding with anticipation. Months of steady construction had culminated in this day. The grand opening of the new rehabilitation wing at Clarksfield County Hospital. Outside his farmhouse, a gentle breeze murmured through fields still glistening with morning dew. The distant silhouette of the hospital campus hinted at recent changes. Steel beams sealed with fresh paint, equipment-laden rooms prepared to greet their first patients. Part of Henry longed to wander his rows of corn in the early light as he usually did, but he knew ceremonies demanded punctuality. So after feeding the chickens, he washed up, donned a clean shirt, and made sure Emily was awake. She emerged from her room in a neat blouse, eyes shining. "Ready, Pa?" she asked, tucking a notebook under her arm. Henry nodded, admiring how she balanced youthful exuberance with a sense of duty. They climbed into his battered pickup, heading toward a day that represented far more than a ribbon cutting. Once, their hospital had seemed doomed to close. Now it was a place that gave hope to families near and far, a testament to what compassion could achieve. Halfway down the dusty road, Henry glanced at Emily, gratitude swelling in his chest. Her volunteer spirit, creative murals, and unwavering optimism had guided him through doubt more times than he could count. As they arrived, the hospital entrance buzzed with guests, staff, and volunteers. Long tables were arranged under a canopy, displaying local crafts, farm produce, and brochures about new rehab services. The air smelled of warm bread, courtesy of Mrs. Turner, who never missed a community event. Henry parked in a gravel corner, scanning the scene with pride and a hint of nerves. Dr. Brooks waved him over, looking poised in a light-colored suit. She wore an expression of tearful joy he recognized from previous milestones. The therapy gardens unveiling, the harvest for health fair, and each time funding arrived in the nick of time. "Henry," she greeted breathlessly, "thank goodness you're here. The mayor wants to speak first, then you, then a short dedication ceremony. Are you comfortable with that?" Henry's stomach fluttered, but he forced a nod. "Yes, ma'am, I'll manage. Thank you for trusting me." Dr. Brooks squeezed his hand, then hurried off to direct a last-minute microphone check. Emily gave him an encouraging pat on the shoulder. "You'll do fine, Pa. Just speak from your heart." Together they walked under the new archway leading to the rehab wing, where construction dust had barely settled. Rows of brand-new exercise machines glimmered behind glass. Henry marveled at the polished floors and bright lighting. Soon, patients would walk these corridors, regaining strength they feared was lost. When it was time for the ceremony, people gathered in a semicircle of folding chairs near the lobby doors. The mayor, a stout woman with a booming voice, welcomed everyone, praising how Clarksfield's resilience had put them on the map. She mentioned Dawson's Grove, the philanthropic foundation, and local donors who contributed anything from pies to thousands of dollars. Henry shuffled his feet, trying to keep calm as heads nodded in agreement. The crowd included old friends, new staff, philanthropic representatives, and visitors from neighboring regions. He spotted Dr. Mayfield standing beside Dr. Brooks, each with damp eyes. Even Malcolm and Anna had driven in for the day, beaming from the front row. "Now," the mayor announced, "I'd like to call up the man whose quiet generosity set off this remarkable chain of events. Henry Dawson, please join us." Applause rose. Cheeks burning, Henry approached the makeshift podium. He glanced at Emily, who gave him a firm thumbs up. Clearing his throat, he remembered to breathe. "Morning, everyone," he began, voice shaking at first. Then a hush fell, drawing courage from the warm faces. "I'm honored to see so many of you here. This wing, it's something I never believed possible when we feared the hospital might shut its doors." He paused, recalling that night he delivered an unmarked envelope to the reception desk. "I want to remind us all, the hospital didn't just rebuild on money alone. It rebuilt on compassion. Neighbors who gave produce, kids who painted murals, staff who never quit. Step by step, we saw what a few seeds of hope could grow into. Now, We stand in front of a facility that's going to help people walk again, heal from accidents, regain lost strength. That's not about me. It's about us, a family bigger than any single farm or donation. The applause came again, gentle yet rousing, and Henry's heart pounded with gratitude. He finished with a simple truth. Folks told me that one small act can set off a powerful chain reaction. You all proved them right. Bowing his head, he retreated from the podium, catching Anna's approving smile. The mayor took over, prompting Dr. Brooks to snip a green ribbon draped across the entrance. Cheers and whistles erupted as the band played a lively tune, the crowd dispersing into the brand-new halls to admire equipment and consultation rooms. Henry stepped aside to let others pass, inhaling relief that he'd managed to speak without stumbling. Inside, visitors wandered the rehab ward. They examined specially designed treadmills, harness systems for gait training, and an aquatic therapy pool that glistened in a large glass room. Nurses and physical therapists explained how each station would serve patients coping with injuries or chronic conditions. Overhearing their enthusiasm, Henry felt tears prick his eyes. No child, no elder, would need to travel hours for advanced rehabilitation. Families would stay close to their farmland, supported by neighbors. Emily brushed his arm. "Pa, you all right?" He nodded, voice thick. "Just overwhelmed in a good way." An hour later, Dr. Mayfield ushered him into a side corridor. "Someone's here to see you," she said, voice tinged with excitement. Rounding the corner, he found Patricia Hardy, the former nurse from up north. Her face lit up at the sight of him. "Henry," she exclaimed, "you've done wonders. I had to see it myself." She gestured around. "I'm in awe. This place is a miracle." Henry accepted her hug, remembering how she once asked for help. "I'm glad you could make it," he said, scanning her hopeful expression. Patricia explained that her clinic's situation remained precarious, but local folks were brainstorming. She'd come seeking inspiration. Dr. Brooks offered to guide her through the therapy garden and the new wing, highlighting key steps they took. Patricia nodded furiously, scribbling notes. "I want to replicate parts of this, get small grants, rally neighbors. If we can accomplish half of what you did," Henry patted her shoulder, "you can accomplish all of it if folks believe. We'll help however we can." Patricia wiped her eyes, voice shaky. "Thank you." As the day went on, dignitaries filtered out, and staff resumed normal tasks. The hospital would open the rehab wing to patients next week, giving time for final checks. Emily and Henry strolled outside, past Dawson's Grove, where autumn leaves drifted among the flower beds. A handful of children still roamed the garden, bundled in jackets, trailing little wagons of tools. Emily smiled, remembering the first seeds they'd planted here. "Feels like home," she murmured. Henry gazed at the plaque still shining near the entrance, reading Dawson's Grove in quiet reflection. He recalled nights he feared losing everything, only to realize that sharing what little he had could spark immeasurable change. "You know," he said softly to Emily, "this all started because I wanted to repay a kindness. Now it's given me more than I ever expected." She squeezed his hand. "And it's still growing, Pa." By late afternoon, the crowd thinned, and Henry joined Dr. Brooks and a few others in her office for a small celebratory toast. Paper cups of sparkling juice sufficed. They clinked their cups, offering thanks for completed goals, ongoing expansions, and new dreams. Dr. Brooks announced that with the rehab wing in place, the hospital board hoped to launch an outreach program for underprivileged communities, sending teams to share resources. Anna chimed in that her foundation stood ready to assist. Eyes swiveled to Henry, the quiet man who once felt out of place in such discussions, but he'd grown used to it. "Count me in," he said. "I'll help however I can." As dusk settled, Henry and Emily returned to the farm. The drive felt serene, fields aglow under the last light. Tired yet content, they parked by the old barn, stepping onto gravel that crunched underfoot. Emily fetched eggs from the coop while Henry fed the livestock. Soon, the horizon faded to rich indigo. Inside the farmhouse, they shared a modest supper. Sitting by lamplight, Emily described her future hopes, maybe blending agricultural knowledge with health care. "We're all connected, right?" she mused. "Hospitals heal people, farms feed them. We shouldn't separate them." Henry nodded, proud of her vision. Before bed, he wandered outside once more, gazing up at a sky shimmering with stars. He thought of distant counties that might find hope in Clarksfield's story, recalled Patricia's shining eyes, and pictured new farmland-based clinics. The seeds planted here would scatter far beyond these fields. Standing in the hush, he felt the land breathing with him. This hospital, these expansions, they were living proof that compassion remained unstoppable if ordinary folks dared to act. And though the road continued full of potential twists, Henry Dawson had come to trust that goodness, once sown, would bear fruit in every season. He headed inside, heart at peace, knowing that tomorrow's sunrise would reveal a horizon open to endless growth.